Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, everybody, for the chance to be here this afternoon. It's a privilege. Um, I started in the antibiotic space about 15 years ago, as Jamie was mentioning, in clinical development, and at one of the smaller companies at the time, which was Cubist. And that company grew up successfully, at least as far as biopharmaceutical companies go. Many don't, of course, given all the risk and the attrition that we see in the pipeline. But unfortunately, since that time, what I've observed in working with smaller companies that are trying to innovate new antibiotics or infectious disease products, as well as larger companies, is a steady decline, which I think everybody in this room is aware of. And there are a lot of factors that have gone into that, but at the end of the day, as many of the panelists here have noted, the return on investment, to boil it down, really isn't there in the majority of cases. I'm making a gross generalization, so forgive me, but generally speaking, it's not there compared to the decisions that larger pharmaceutical companies have in front of them from a portfolio management perspective. So if you think about the context of a multi-billion-dollar organization that is staring at potentially investing billions into antibiotic development or other infectious disease development for resistant infection, they have a range of options in front of them. And unfortunately, the returns simply aren't there. Now, we know the clinical need is there today, and we know it's going to get a lot worse. I don't think we can stand here today, at least I can't, and suggest that it's going to get better anytime soon, or that we have the armamentarium we need to address where the needs are going over the next decade or two. So I think everybody recognizes it's a significant and legitimate public health issue and a crisis, but I think it's also a crisis within the industry as well, in the sense that the companies who are innovating, both small and large, and who are investing in the development of these programs really have a challenge on their hands internally in terms of what types of investments are they capable of making within antibiotics, for example, that address resistant infection. Most of what I've observed, and again, some of the panelists noted this as well, in recent years has been a push incentives, and those are valuable, and I think they have helped to stimulate what we've seen from earlier stage R&D effort. But we are lacking the sufficient economic incentive on the pull side to carry in mid-sized companies, larger companies that have a range of investment decisions in front of them. And I think from the work that I've done with them and what they have put out in the public domain, they have the best of intentions and want to work hard to address the issues, but the economics at the end of the day are what they are. And so I think the other related point that I would make is that the companies that I've observed in my years of helping them think through planning and where the most needs are and how to best innovate products that are in this space, they're all in different situations. So I think having a range of different types of incentives that they could consider tapping into at different moments in time would be more valuable than going down a single path, which may work well for a biotech company that really needs support, say, with early R&D, moving a program into the clinic, maybe into phase 1 trials at that particular moment. But the needs at phase 2 and 3 and heading towards registration and then commercialization are very, very different from an economics and an operational perspective, as well as the degree of investment that these companies need to make. One area where I personally think it could be a more efficient lever than others perhaps involves carve-outs around reimbursement that don't fundamentally disrupt the existing model. I think having different models would be attractive in terms of overall reimbursement and incentives, but one that could leverage the existing model, I think, could be on the carve-out side, where institutions essentially, or hospitals, would not be penalized for using a drug in an appropriate situation that meets stewardship guidelines, which it needs to, for an expensive drug that's at, say, $10,000 or more. which contextually in the work that we do across the industry in different therapeutic areas is extremely undervalued relative to what is paid every single day in almost all other therapeutic areas where there's innovation. So those are some of the things that we observe and I've observed. The last point I wanted to make or mention, and I'll just mention it briefly in the spirit of time, has to do with diagnostics. I think a big part of the challenge is the lack of rapid diagnostics and the inability to establish what the best product is for that patient at that moment in time. Now, of course, there's great clinical judgment and very experienced infectious disease professionals, and of course, blood cultures come back and so forth. But from our experience, it's very limited. And if you're talking about bringing a new product on that's been specifically designed, say, to address an Acinetobacter or a CRE or a pseudomonal infection or what have you, life-threatening infections in the institution, we need more concerted focus on partnership between pharmaceutical companies, diagnostic companies, and other stakeholders, government, NGO, and so forth, to help on the innovation side in diagnostics. There's been a little bit that I've seen out there from the incentive side, but I think it's woefully insufficient for what the need is and what the value it would bring clinically and also economically into the marketplace.